In a time long past, nestled deep within a valley carved by a forgotten river, there lay a small village named Glimmerwood. It was a place untouched by the grand clocks of kings and the hurried pace of city life. The valley was flanked on all sides by the Viridian Woods, a forest so ancient and vast that its edges were a mystery, and its heart was the subject of quiet, fearful legends. The trees, mostly great oaks and silent pines, grew so close together that even on the brightest days, the forest floor was a place of perpetual twilight. The village itself was a collection of sturdy cottages, built from the dark timber of the forest and stone pulled from the riverbed. Their thatched roofs were heavy with moss, light green, sleeping brows settled low against the frequent mists that rolled down from the mountains. Life in Glimmerwood was simple, dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, and the slow, deliberate turning of the seasons. At the very edge of the village, in the last cottage before the forest began its silent reign, lived a man named Elias. Elias was the village silversmith. He was a quiet man, with hands that were surprisingly steady and delicate for his trade. His hair was the color of ash, and his eyes held the deep, patient gray of a cloudy sky. He lived alone, his days a quiet ritual of heat and patience, his nights filled with the soft sounds of the encroaching woods. His workshop was his home. It was a single, large room, filled with the tools of his craft. Tiny hammers, chisels, and files lay in neat, orderly rows. A small furnace stood in a corner, its stones blackened by years of use. This is where Elias spent his hours, transforming dull lumps of silver into things of quiet beauty, simple rings for weddings, delicate chains, and small, polished lockets to hold a secret or a memory. The villagers respected his work. They saw it as a small point of light against the vast, dark tapestry of the woods that surrounded them. But to Elias, his work felt incomplete. He felt he was merely shaping metal, not capturing its soul. He had not yet created something that truly reflected the deep, silent world he inhabited. The people of Glimmerwood did not venture into the Viridian Woods. They held a deep, inherited respect for it, a respect born of fear. They spoke in hushed tones of the forest's guardian, a presence they called the Whispering Shadow. It was not a creature, they said, not in the way a wolf or a bear is a creature. It had never been seen to harm a soul. It made no sound, yet they called it the Whisperer, for the feeling it left in the air, a feeling of being observed by something ancient and unknowable. The legend said that the shadow would sometimes walk the forest edge on the nights of a new moon, when the world was darkest. It was a silent, formless thing, a patch of deeper darkness moving against the twilight. And in its wake, it would sometimes leave things behind. Not footprints, not broken twigs, but strange, impossible objects. A single, perfect leaf, petrified and turned to a substance that shone like polished obsidian. A smooth, gray stone that was impossibly light, as if it were hollow. Most villagers avoided these artifacts, seeing them as omens. They would hurry past, making a sign to ward off ill fortune. But Elias, a man who dealt in the tangible and the real, was not afraid. He was curious. His craftsman's mind could not reconcile the stories with the laws of nature he understood. He had, on occasion, found these strange objects himself. He had a small wooden box containing a single, petrified acorn, its surface as smooth and cool as polished jet. He had studied it for hours, marveling at its perfect, unnatural form. It was a mystery, a puzzle crafted by the forest itself. And Elias, above all else, was a man who understood and respected careful craftsmanship. One autumn evening, as a thick, cold mist settled over the valley like a shroud, Elias stood at his doorway. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The world was dissolving into shades of gray. As he watched the edge of the woods, where the trees became a solid wall of black, he saw it. Or rather, he saw the absence of it. A patch of darkness, deeper and more profound than the surrounding night, moved with a slow, deliberate grace along the tree line. It did not rustle the leaves. It did not snap a twig. It flowed like ink spilled in water, a silent, living void. Elias's heart did not pound with fear, but with a deep, resonant curiosity. He felt an inexplicable pull, a desire to understand this silent walker. He remained perfectly still, a shadow in his own doorway, watching the deeper shadow move. It passed his cottage and continued its journey along the edge of Glimmerwood, eventually melting back into the impenetrable darkness from which it came. The world was still again, the only sound the slow dripping of water from the eaves of his roof. Driven by an impulse he did not fully understand, Elias lit a lantern, pulled on a heavy cloak, and stepped out into the damp night. The lantern's soft, yellow light cut a small, trembling circle in the immense darkness. He walked to the path where the shadow had passed, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, wet earth. And there, lying on a bed of dark moss, was the thing it had left behind. It was a fern frond. But it was not green. It was made of a substance that seemed to drink the lantern light and reflect it back with a soft, internal luminescence. It was perfect in every detail, each tiny leaflet exquisitely formed. Elias reached out a hesitant hand and touched it. It was cool and smooth, with the weight and density of pure, solid silver. Elias carried the silver fern back to his workshop, his mind a whirl of silent questions. He placed it on his workbench, its otherworldly gleam a stark contrast to the familiar, earthy silver he worked with. He brought out his loupe, the small magnifying glass he used to inspect his finest work. Under magnification, the fern was even more miraculous. There were no seams, no tool marks, no signs of construction. It was as if a living fern had, in an instant, been transmuted into precious metal, its life force frozen in a silver echo. This was not craftsmanship. This was alchemy. This was nature's own secret art. For days, Elias could think of nothing else. The silver fern sat on his bench, a silent invitation. The fear and superstition of the villagers seemed a distant, foolish thing. How could one fear something that created such impossible beauty? The mystery of the woods was no longer a story told around a fire, it was a tangible reality, sitting in the center of his workshop. He looked at his own work, the simple rings, the plain lockets. They seemed dull and lifeless in comparison. His desire to create something true, something with a soul, now had a new focus. He realized that to understand the art of the forest, he could not simply study what it left behind. He had to see the artist at work. He had to walk into the woods. He made his preparations slowly, deliberately. He packed not a sword or an axe, but his finest, smallest tools, a set of calipers, a small, sharp scribe, and a soft leather cloth. He packed a small amount of bread and cheese, and a water skin. And as the next new moon approached, a night promising the deepest darkness, Elias felt no fear. He felt only the quiet, focused resolve of a craftsman about to learn a new and profound secret of his trade. He would follow the shadow, not to hunt it, but to learn from it. The night of the new moon arrived, cloaked in a chilling silence. Elias left his cottage, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to recoil from the true, deep darkness of the woods. He crossed the invisible boundary between the village and the forest, and the air immediately changed. It grew cooler, heavier, thick with the scent of pine and ancient, damp earth. The familiar sounds of the village faded, replaced by the subtle symphony of the wilderness. The whisper of wind through the high canopy. The faint rustle of some small, unseen creature in the undergrowth. The creak and groan of old trees settling their weight. Elias did not search for the shadow. He simply began to walk, moving deeper into the woods than any villager had dared to in a generation. He moved slowly, his lantern held low. He was not an intruder, but a visitor. His senses, sharpened by years of detailed work, began to notice the subtle artistry of the forest. He saw the intricate lace of moss growing on a fallen log, the spiraling pattern of bark on an old oak, the delicate, star-like shape of a fungus clinging to a tree trunk. It was a workshop of a different kind, one that worked in centuries, not hours. For what felt like a long time, he walked. The forest grew denser. The trees were larger here, their trunks thick as pillars in a great, green cathedral. The canopy above was so thick that not a single star was visible. The only light was the small, brave circle of his lantern. He felt a profound sense of solitude, but not of loneliness. He felt he was in the presence of something vast and sleeping, and he was but a tiny, fleeting thought in its ancient dream. Then, he began to see the trail. At first, it was just a single, dark, petrified leaf on the path. He knelt and examined it, its form perfect. A little further on, he found another. And then a cluster of small, jet-black stones, impossibly smooth. The shadow had passed this way, perhaps many nights ago, perhaps only one. He followed the trail, his heart calm, his mind focused. The path was leading him deeper, towards the forest's silent, sleeping heart. The trail led him to a place where the dense forest suddenly opened up. He stood at the edge of a large, circular clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a single, colossal tree. It was an oak, but unlike any he had ever seen. It was ancient beyond reckoning, its bark the color of pale silver, and its vast branches, bare of leaves, reached towards the sky like gnarled arms in supplication. The ground of the clearing was not soil, but soft, silvery gray dust, and all around the great tree grew a garden of impossible flora. There were the silver ferns he had seen, growing in silent, metallic beauty. There were flowers with petals of polished obsidian, and grasses that looked as though they were spun from shadow and smoke. This was the source. This was the heart of the woods. And as Elias stood there, a silent witness in the lantern light, he realized the canopy directly above the clearing was thin. And through it, a single, pure beam of moonlight, unseen by the rest of the valley on this moonless night, pierced the darkness and fell directly upon the ancient, silver tree. And then, he understood. The shadow was not a creature that walked. It was the slow, sweeping shadow of the great tree's own branches, cast by this hidden, concentrated moonlight. And wherever this ethereal, silver-filtered light touched the ground, a slow, silent alchemy took place. The moonlight, imbued with the ancient magic of the tree and the unique minerals in the soil, did not just illuminate. It transformed. It petrified life into a beautiful, silent echo of itself. He watched, mesmerized, as the shadow of a branch crept over a living, green moss patch. The process was too slow to see, but he could feel it, a quiet, powerful transmutation. A silent, patient artist at work. The great mystery was not a monster or a ghost. It was a beautiful, secret, natural process. A geological and astronomical marvel, a clockwork of moonlight and magic that created beauty in the deepest dark. Elias did not touch anything. He did not take one of the silver ferns or obsidian flowers. To do so would have felt like a violation, like tearing a page from a sacred book. He simply stood for a long time, watching the slow, silent dance of light and shadow, imprinting the image onto his soul. He had come seeking a secret of his craft, and he had found the secret of the world itself, that in the deepest darkness, the most patient and beautiful art is made. Finally, he bent down and picked up a single, small, fallen leaf from the silver tree's base. It was light and cool in his palm. It was enough. He turned and began his long, slow walk back to the village, his heart no longer questioning, but full. He returned to his workshop as the first, faint, gray light of dawn was breaking. The world was stirring, but Elias felt as though he had been awake for a lifetime. He did not light his furnace that day. Instead, he sat at his workbench and simply looked at the single, silver leaf. From that day on, Elias's work changed. He no longer felt his craft was incomplete. Inspired by the silent, perfect artistry of the forest, he began to create things of a new and subtle beauty. He fashioned lockets engraved with the delicate patterns of moss, rings that coiled like the bark of an ancient oak, and chains that flowed with the silent grace of the shadow he had witnessed. The villagers noticed the change. His work now had a depth, a soul, that it had lacked before. It held a whisper of the deep, quiet woods. Elias remained a quiet man, living at the edge of the village. But he was no longer lonely. He felt a deep kinship with the vast, silent forest that was his neighbor. He understood that he, in his small workshop with his hammers and his files, and the great, ancient forest, with its moonlight and its magic, were both engaged in the same, sacred work. The slow, patient, and beautiful art of creating light in the darkness. And as he worked, the soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of his hammer was a peaceful, steady sound, a sound that could lull a village, and perhaps even you, into a deep and profound sleep.